Hello and welcome everybody, this is Roland Hartmann from GraphicEmotion.com and I'm back with another Stardust tutorial for Superluminal.tv. In this tutorial we will create this little scene that you can see here, and we will explore some of the latest features of Stardust, and one of them, which is pretty awesome, is that we can now create 3D wireframes out of 3D objects. We will take a look at that, and we will also go through some other new features, like some things in the transparent material and some things in the user interface. So it's going to be very exciting. Let's jump right into After Effects. In After Effects, first of all, I create a new composition and call this 3D wireframe. And I just use a standard HDTV preset, make it 250 frames long, 10 seconds, okay. I will create a new solid, call it Stardust. And I will apply the Stardust effect to this layer. By default, I have my emitter and my particle node here, but I want to delete these for now because right now I don't need them. I want to start out with a 3D object, and to do that we go to the library by pressing the preset browser here, these icons here on top. And in the 3D library we have some music instruments, and I want to use this drum. Let me mention that the 3D library ships with the full version of Stardust, so you won't find it in the trial version. Okay, so now you see we have this drum model here, right in the center of our scene. It's quite small, so let me change this. Let's go to my model node here. And in the model properties, I will just make this quite big. So let's set it to 1000. And another thing I want to do is I want to center it, because I want it to be in the middle of my composition like that. It looks quite flat, and this is just because we have no lights and no environment in our scene. So let's quickly add an environment, and there's a little trick. You probably are already familiar with this. If you open up the preset browser, inside the models folder you have these extrudes. And no matter which one you use here, just add one to your scene, and this will also add an environment. You see now the look changed quite a bit. So let's just delete this nose tree that was created because we do not need this. And also let's delete the Stardust text on top of our timeline. And now you see we have this environment composition here, and it's already assigned in Stardust. If you want to assign your own environment composition, if we take a look what this is just a very simple black and white composition. And if you go to the Stardust render settings, here you can assign your own layer. So if you want to use an HDRI or whatever, then you can specify this right here. But for the sake of this tutorial, I will just use this standard simple environment. Okay, so let me change my view to a custom view here, and let's zoom in a bit that we get a little bit closer to our model, something like that. Okay, and now we will start to build our 3D wireframe. So first of all, we need a new emitter, and since the latest version there is a new option. You can right click now inside this empty field here and create nodes like that. Pretty handy. So let's create an emitter and let's create a particle node. And I will just link these two together and change a few settings in my emitter. First of all, we want the type to be object because we want to emit on our object. We want this to emit only once. We want the particles to have no speed at all. So set the speed to 0. And I want to specify my object. And you see I have the option to use a file. So I could click in here now and specify a file on my hard disk. But another thing that you can do is you can just link a model node to your emitter. And this will then be recognized as the object to emit on. So if I do this, you will see immediately that Stardust creates particles along the edge of our 3D model. So it doesn't look very good now, so let's change the particle settings. First of all, I will increase the lifespan to 10 seconds to make sure that they live through the whole composition. Then let's go to the properties and take down the size to 1 for now. And then let's take a little bit of a look what's going on here. So you see now we are emitting along the edges, so along every edge of our 3D model. And you see that these are quite a lot of particles. And if we go to our emitter, there is an option in the object properties that is called the edge subdivide. If I subdivide 0, so if I have no subdivisions, then you see the particle count is less. And if you increase this, I do not want to go too crazy, but let's say 25, then you get a pretty dense subdivision. Let's see whether this works or whether I just killed it. No, it works. You see now I get nearly these lines and yeah, many particles. But for the sake of creating a 3D wireframe, it's better to set this to 0 in the beginning. Okay, so let's leave this for now and let's try to apply a 3D particle to this to get a wireframe. First of all, we can go to our particles and instead of shape circle, I will use model. By default, what this will do is it will create small cubes, but you cannot see them now. And this is because there is no light in the scene. So let me just quickly add a light. And I will just add a new, let's just add a new point light. Doesn't really matter for now. Just that we have something in our scene. And now you can see the small 3D cubes. Okay, but how can we turn this into a wireframe? To do that, we have to create our own particle. So our own 3D particle. Therefore, we create a new model node. Let's add a model node right here. Awesome. And now I can link this to my particles. And you see now nothing has really changed. So, and this is because I have to set up the model node first. So let's specify a primitive here and let's specify a cube for now. And if we take this standard cube, it's very small, it's 1 by 1 by 1 and has a lot of segments. So let's change this. First of all, we need only one segment per side here. And now I will increase the size a bit just to demonstrate what is happening here. So 5 times 5 times 5. Now I see my cubes a little bit better. Still not a wireframe though. Okay, so what we have to do is we have to extrude our model along the Z axis. Let me demonstrate this quickly by just disconnecting this, or first of all I will just disable my emitter, right click and click enable, then it will be gone. And I will just disconnect this for a moment so that I can see my model. Actually I can't see it, but I think this is just because it's a little bit dark in here and because it's too small. So let's take a look here. I will just make it bigger for now, that you see what I'm talking about. Yes, and now my cube is visible here. It's not very clearly visible, but if I turn on then you see what is happening here. So here's my cube in the middle of my scene. Now it is important if you use a cube or a cylinder, or maybe you want to apply another model to your wireframe, that you extrude it on the right axis. Extrude means in this case just to make it bigger. And I will show you how to do this now. So first of all, let's make sure that we are on the right axis. And we have this Stardust null here that was created by Stardust when I added this model here. This is the control null of my drum model. And yeah, it's just living here in the middle of our composition. And here you can see the axes. So what we want to do is now we want to extrude this little cube here along, or make it bigger, I should say, make it bigger along the Z axis. So let's go to our model node, and inside my model properties, I will just set this now to 100 and set. Good. And now we can just turn down the size here, maybe for now just to 2 times 2, that we still see what we have got. And now I have this very thin bar here, and this I will use to create my wireframe. Okay, so now let's just relink these and let's enable our emitter and let's see what happens. And you see what happens. It looks really cool, but it's not a wireframe. So we created a bit of a mess here. So let's turn on our black background. You see what's happening here. Now, to get this right, there are 2 things that you have to do now. First of all, we go to our particle node, and inside the rotation properties, you have this option to orient to. Right now it's set to nothing, so they just live here in the space. But if I set this to normal, it will orient along the normals of our model. And this also doesn't look as we intended it. It looks cool, but it's still a bit of a mess. So now let's go to our emitter, and there's another setting that's quite important here. And this is in my emitter settings, in the model properties here. object properties it's called, there is this edges inherit size. So if we select this, you immediately see what's happening now. And now something changed. Now they are aligned properly along my edges. But there's still one problem, and they are offset kind of. You see that they are not really here, they stick out, and also here. It's not really looking nice. And there is one more option that we have to change, and this is inside the model node. And there we have these model properties. And inside these model properties, we have this align model. And if I set this now to front, you see now everything jumps in place, and I have this really nice 3D structure that is following exactly the edges of my model. So, okay, it was a bit complicated. Let me show you this one more time using another model. Let's delete this model node for now. Now I'm back with my standard particles. Let's get rid of our emitter for a moment, and let's do this again. This time I want to use a cylinder. And I will show you how to do this with a cylinder. So let's go to primitive. I created a new model node, by the way, and I will use a cylinder. Okay, so by default, this is also very small. So just for now, I will make it 50 times 50 that we can see what we have in our scene. Now you see this cylinder is sitting right in the middle here. Now, if we want to extrude or make it bigger, we have to do this, of course, along the y-axis, because then we create this kind of a tube that we need to create our wireframe. But you see that it is not oriented correctly. As I said before, if we again check our axes, it's oriented along the y-axis. And if I apply this, it will not work. It will not create a nice wireframe. So let's go to this model. And let's change this orientation. And by the way, we can also turn down the segments here. We do not need that many segments. So let's turn down the segments on X. If you turn this down to a low value, then you will see that this gets like this. It can also be cool, you know, but I want to have it a bit more round, a bit more smooth. So I think with 12 we can get away, because I will scale this down later on. And on the Y, actually I don't need a lot, so I can go to 3. Okay, so my cylinder is not oriented the right way. Let me turn this down to 2 for now, that we see what we have. Now I have this small cylinder here. And to orientate it the right way, I go to my properties and just flip it 90 degrees on the x-axis. And you see now it is oriented along the z-axis. And this is exactly what I want. And now I can use this to drive my wireframe creation. So let's link this here to the particle. Let's enable our emitter. And you see now I created this really cool looking wireframe using this cylinder. Okay, so now I think I hope this is clear. Important is that the model is oriented along the z-axis, and it's also important that you check these options like the edges inherit size. That's very important. If I uncheck this, you will see what's happening. We'll mess it up completely. So this is very, very important. And also another option is inside the model node that you always use these align models. You see that in this case the default works, but sometimes it does not, and you can now change this to front. You see in this case that there is no difference, but for example if I go to back, then you see, okay, now it's messed up, but it really depends on which model you're using. You saw that before when I worked with my cube, I had to set this to front so that it worked. So if you have problems, then just come into the model node and check these align options here to get it right. A quick addition here at this point of the tutorial, there is another way how you can stretch your models along the wireframe, and this is this normalized scale options here that we have inside this model node. So you see that I recorded this actually now after finalizing the tutorial, but yeah, I found out that there is another way that I quickly want to add here. So instead of changing the size manually, you could do the same if your cylinder is by default 1 by 1. And you see that now they are of course very small, so they are not covering the whole length of our edges. But if you click this normalize scale, you will see what happens. Now the cylinders, first of all, in the first moment you see that they are pretty big, but they are stretched along the z-axis. So now they cover the whole wireframe. But now I could just change the X size. So I can come in here now and put in 0.01, let's say. And then you see I still get the same result. It's exactly the same. If you do not use this, then you can put in by hand your value 1 here, and then you can choose whether you want it to be, for example, just 50% of these edges, or whether you want it to be 100% covering these edges. So these are the two options that you have to align your models properly along the edges. Okay, so now let's just make this look a little bit nicer. First of all, let's go to our model and let's make it smaller. So I put it to 1 on X, so this wireframe structure gets a little bit smaller and thinner. Then I want to add a material here to my models. A very simple material that we can set up now. Let's go to the diffuse and let's change the color from particle to 0. Let's maybe make these a little bit darker, like gray. And now we can just go to the reflection at the metal and turn this on maybe to 75 so that they are a bit reflective. Looks not too bad. Okay, so you can spend a bit more time creating nice materials, but for now we'll just leave it. Now what I want to add is I want to add a transparent version, like a holographic version of my drum to this wireframe. So how can I do that? You see that we have our model still in the scene, but right now it's not really visible because it's just used by the emitter as a model to emit on. So to change this, we can just select this and press Ctrl D to create a duplicate of these two nodes, and you see immediately that my drum is visible again. So the 3D model is visible again. Let me put this down here. And now I will just delete this material node here because we really do not need this to create particles along our model. And now we'll change the material of our drum that's visible right here. So let's go into this material, and instead of this solid material, I want to turn this into a transparent material. And you see by default, this could be already a nice look, you know. This looks like a really bit of a technical, semi-transparent wireframe stuff going on here. So it looks pretty cool. The wireframe sits nicely on top of our 3D model. But let me make this a little bit more like artificial. I want to create kind of a holographic look. So to do that, I will go into my diffuse channel and I will just delete this texture here. So I will just set it to none, that we have no texture in here. I could now colorize this a bit, you know, like holograms are bluish most of the time. I don't know why, but somehow they are. And now there is a new very cool option that I want to show you. And therefore I will just quickly turn off my emitter again, just disable this, and let's turn on my black background because we can see this a little bit better. What's going on here? So inside the transparent material options, we now have the options to normal effects opacity, it's called. And if we change this to 100%, you will see what this does. And it's kind of a Fresnel effect, I think. If you are familiar with this term, you have it in materials in Cinema 4D or 3D applications. So the transparency of the polygons of our 3D models is influenced by the angle of our camera. If I just select the camera tool and rotate this, this will be a little bit more obvious, I think. You see that depending on the angle of my camera, different surfaces or different parts of my model get more transparent and less transparent. And this creates this really nice holographic look. And it's really cool. I really like this look. I will not make it 100%. I think this is a little bit too strong, maybe something like 75, that I still have a bit of transparency in the other areas of my model. But this looks really nice. Then one more thing that I want to do is I want to turn off the bump. You see that this upper area here of the drum has this bump going on, and I will just turn this off. So just get rid of this. I don't need it now in my visual. Okay, so this looks quite good. Now let's enable our emitter again, put these two together, and you see that this is quite a nice result. Now there is another thing that we can do. We can add like little spheres on the connection points here. So to do that, let's just duplicate this whole model tree here. Let me quickly get this a bit of the way so that I can select the other ones. I want to duplicate this node tree here. So select everything, Ctrl D to create a duplicate, and just move it over here. I just make a little bit more room here and take my model. Actually, I could delete this. So let's delete this model and let's just link this emitter to the same model here, because then we only need one model node in our structure here and it will still work. Now, let me quickly change these. So this is my wireframe. And this will be my, let's say, my connections. It's always good to have good connections. Okay, so let's change a few things in the emitter settings. So we can leave object, we can leave ones, but I want to change the emit type from edges to vertices. And this will again create a nice mess, you know, also looks quite cool. Maybe if you are looking for building something like this, whatever it is. But the easier method in this case is to go to our model node and change this now, the primitive here, in my primitive properties, from cylinder to sphere. And right now, this is very small and also the segments don't fit. So let's put these to 12 times 12 and let's increase the size to maybe 3. Let's see, probably 3 will be a bit too much. Yeah, a little bit too big. Let's make it 2, like so. Now I have very small connection points, but actually it looks really cool, especially if I go to my model of the wireframe and turn the size down a little bit further. So instead of 1, I will just change this to 0.5 maybe to make this really thin. Yeah, that looks really nice, cool. And now I will just change this material, just that we see that this is a different object, and I will just make this really dark, maybe nearly black. It's quite that black, like so. Okay, just that we see that we have different objects going on here. Now you see I have this really thin wireframe and these small connection points. You could of course create totally different style by choosing different materials or emissive materials or whatever you want. Okay, so this is more or less it for this tutorial. I just want to give you one more tip, and this is if I add a camera now, let me add a quick camera here to my scene. In this case, I will use maybe, let's see, yeah, let's use a 50mm camera, why not? So let's go to my active camera, let's take a look how this looks like. And I will just quickly create a new orbit null just to set up my camera angle. I will just rotate it up a bit, maybe 20 degrees. Oops, sorry, 20 degrees. Let's see. Oh, of course, minus. I always get this wrong. Minus 20 degrees. Good. Now let's zoom in a bit or move in a bit with my camera. Minus 1700, get closer to my object. Nice. And what I want to show you is how to properly use the DOF, the depth of field. So if I go to my camera now and press AA and enable this, you will see that something is happening, but you will also see that somehow it looks a little bit strange. So let me quickly shift my focal point to the right point, and you see that it is way back there, and I want it to be here right in the front of my model. So let's just shift this right to the front of my drum here. Oops, now I changed the aperture. I didn't want to do that. I just wanted to shift the focal point. Something like that looks good. Okay. And now if you take a look here, it seems if I turn off my wireframe for a moment that it just doesn't work with the transparent material that well. And if we go to our transparent material, which is actually right here, there is an option that will improve this quite a bit. And this is right here in the transparent material options. So if you turn on this effect DOF, then this look will improve. Let me quickly show you this. Right now, you cannot really see it because my aperture is probably a little bit too low. But if I just increase this to a bit of a crazy level, let's say a really crazy level, like 150, which will create very shallow depth of field here, as you can see. And if I do this again, to make this just a bit more obvious what this does. So if we uncheck the effect DOF now, you see that we get these strange problems here and that this doesn't look right. And by just checking this little box here, you see now it looks really cool and looks really nice. And this is also what I wanted to show you, because this is important to create nice looks. I want to show you one more thing, and this is just a little technique how you can create build-up animations with these wireframes, because it's really simple to do and fast to do. Let's select the wireframe emitter, and let's change now this emitter from emitting once to emitting a sequence. And if we do that by default, it's set to 100 particles per second. So sequence means it will just emit 100 particles per second. And 100 particles per second is not really a lot here in our case because there are so many particles. But if you take a look here at the bottom, you see that something is happening over the time. So it's kind of building up these structures. If we increase this amount now, maybe to 2500, then this buildup will be a bit faster. So let's take a look here, and you see over the time of my 10 seconds now, it will nicely build up this structure. I think it will not even be enough to build everything. Here are still no connections visible. I'm not quite sure. Maybe I have to increase this even further. Let's put in 5000 here. Let's see. Still no connections here, so I need even more. Okay, let's crank it up to 10,000 per second. And now I have my connections here. So now I think that it builds up the whole structure over time. Yes, okay. So if I create a quick run preview, you will see what this does now. So let's take a look here. It will just, the particles will suddenly appear. So this is cool if you aim for that look or for that kind of animation. So you could create a nice time-lapse build-up of this wireframe. And you see how these structures are now built part by part. So if you want to do this faster, you can even increase this particles per second here. Okay, I think this is enough for now. So let's take a look what this does. You see now it's building up these particles. But there's even a cooler option, and this is if you change the size over life of the particles. So let's go to our particle node here. And here we have these over life options. And if you change this size now, over life, let's select a preset. And in my case, I want to use this preset here and apply it. So this one here, fade in Bezier, it's called. But I want to make this actually even steeper. So in the beginning, I need this to be even steeper. They have to grow faster. And so I will change this quickly. And now I will do exactly the same for my connections. So let's go to my connections. Let's change this also to sequence and also to 10,000. And I will just copy over my particle over life graph here, just copy it and now go to these particles, the connection particles. And here in the over life, I can now just paste this in the size, paste, awesome. And now let's take a look what this does. And this will create a bit of a nicer build-up animation because now they are growing, you know, now they are kind of appearing slower and kind of building the structure nicely. And this is a really cool effect. So you can create really nice build-ups of your 3D models by using this quick technique that I wanted to share. So let's render a few more seconds just that you see what this does. Okay, let's take a look. And you see now our structure builds up nicely. And I think that this is a really pretty cool effect, especially if we think that we are still in After Effects, still working on only one layer and creating this immensely complex 3D animation. Absolutely fantastic. And one final hint that I give you now in the end of this tutorial, actually all of this is not necessary because there are presets that already contain these wireframe setups. Yeah. So let me show you this quickly. You go to the preset browser and inside the models, and there is this folder called edges. And if you open this up here, you see we have different setups of wireframe cubes, of wireframe texts. So you can actually use these and also then just relink your models. I will just quickly open this up. So I will just replace my entire stuff that I've got here in my Stardust setup, and you see what I've got here now. There are the edges, there are the vertices, in this case also spheres, and then of course you have this model here that is connected. So if you want to use one of these presets as a starting point, it's very easy. You can just replace this model here with another model, and then it will automatically create a nice wireframe. Okay, so this is it with this tutorial. I hope that you liked it, and I hope that you learned some new techniques that you can now implement in your project. If you have any questions, then please feel free to post them in the comments. So thank you very much for watching, and I really hope to see you soon. Goodbye.